Healer is not well designed, or at least well explained, in Final Fantasy XIV. If you're coming from other MMOs, or even using common sense, you might picture helpful busybodies constantly nursing the health of their friends. This is not accurate. My name is Specs, and I started this game, like many Bright-Eyed Sprouts, as a DPS. I thought the Black Mage Megumin cosplay seemed awesome, and I was having the time of my life transposing on level 16 fools. It kind of sucked sitting in 20-minute queues for the story though, and not long after getting into endgame raiding, I wanted a change. I picked up Healer on a whim. I was hoping it was just a caster DPS with extra steps, and honestly, that was too true. I'm not exactly a world first pink parser at this point, but I now have a good amount of Savage experience and a chunk of Ultimate experience under my belt. Despite it being arguably the game's most hated role, I've become a big fan, and maybe you can too with the right frame of mind. But it is definitely not for everyone. You've probably heard the term green DPS. This is accurate. Healer in Final Fantasy XIV is a support DPS role, except the DPS elements are kind of boring compared to actual DPS jobs, and the support elements are probably not going to satisfy any AFK Mercy mains. However, if you're interested in juggling these two archetypes and find joy in optimizing simple but routine things, Healer might interest you. I'm going to offer my insights into the role, and you can then decide if you want to journey into the world of Party Finder babysitting. Let's begin. Alright, so I've already explained what a healer isn't and said it's a green DPS, but what does that mean in the context of the game? It makes sense to explore this question in some depth first, so we'll start here. By the way, I won't really be getting into job particulars here because, well, they're all kind of the same, and I might do a different video on that later. Anyway, when I was still playing Black Mage, I didn't understand my WoW friends' complaints about the game's enormous GCD. I was, after all, a Black Mage and was basically AFKing in between 30-second casts. It didn't really affect me because these long cast times led to big explosions, so there was no problem on my end. Healer, on the other hand, has a more interesting relationship with the GCD than any other role. Whether it was Square's intent or not, you could almost say the entire role is split along the GCD and OGCD divide. 90% of your GCDs will be focused on dealing damage, while most of your healing should come from your OGCDs. One problem with healing is that those DPS GCDs are boring. Every healer job gets a baseline of 1 dot, 1 single target DPS spell, and 1 AoE DPS spell. There are some other gimmicks depending on the job, but the 1-1-1 is the universal template and will make up most of your inputs on every healer. If you're looking to perfect a complicated rotation and play it piano perfect, find a job that comes in brown or blue. I thankfully was not. I was already hooked on Black Mage, another job that famously does not have a particularly intricate damage rotation, but rather gets its complexity from maximizing uptime, so the swap to healer felt really logical. Like BLMs, healers maximize their DPS through good resource management and fight knowledge. The challenge isn't pressing 1, 2, 3, it's learning how to press your simple buttons in complicated situations. Again, healer damage is not complicated. In fact, Square has gone out of its way the last few X-Packs to make it as simple as possible. But your damage depends on other things going well, and that's where the fun really starts. After all, at the simplest level, your role exists to keep people from dying and put dead people back on their feet. More functionally, your job is to make a clear smooth. If it's a dungeon, you keep the tank alive and moving wall to wall. Pulling big packs in dungeons is not only optimal, it's the design. The game doesn't really allow groups to pull more mobs than the devs think they can handle with proper cooldowns anymore. Most modern content is intended to be pulled wall to wall. The easier healing is, the more boring it gets, simple as. Again, it's not the damage, it's the juggling. Glare spamming isn't what keeps me green, it's the moments where your brain splits in half trying to both keep people alive and keep your damage rolling. It's a mini-game inside the kill the boss main game. Taking on 2 to 4 packs at a time and having to actually weave cooldowns in between your generic AoE spam keeps even dungeons from feeling entirely like AFK tombstone farms. If you and the tank are doing your individual jobs well, no dungeon pulls should really be undoable. In a perfect world, your DPS are also using their tools and doing enough damage to keep you and the tank from running out of CDs before the pull is finished. I'm actually really excited to see how these things play out in the upcoming Criterion dungeons, and I'm kinda optimistic that there'll be really fun content for healers. But of course, this is not a perfect world, and you can't always control what tanks or DPS are doing. And as the healer, you have to adjust. Again, that's kind of the fun. Some people will seek death regardless of your noble efforts, but ideally, you try to herd even the most clueless sheep to the pasture to let them graze. In high-end 8-man content, you have a co-healer to coordinate these things with. Together, you make sure you always have cover for the boss's next big attack. This is really the crux of healer optimization, using as little as you need to cover as much as you can. If you're someone who gets satisfaction out of city builders and games that trick your brain into thinking you're a productive human being, healing will be a Schedule 1 drug. Bosses in Final Fantasy XIV run on tight schedules. Maybe if you're someone who needs to eat with a spork to feel the rush of life, more randomness would track with more fun, but while some randomness is welcome, I think the importance is just on forcing healers to use cooldowns. Recent content has done a good job with that, and if they're not going to complicate the DPS rotation, I think this is a good direction for the role. Of course, it's everyone's job to know a fight, but healers and tanks are most directly responsible for handling all the incoming damage. At any given time, you have so many resources at your disposal. Harder Savages and Ultimates have periods of intense but scheduled raid damage, and you have to think about how to deal with it while saving something for the next mechanic. For lower end content, or even lower level content where you don't have as many tools, the solutions are different, but the problems are the same. At every level, the most basic resource you have is your time. If you have to use a global cooldown for a heal, then you have to use one. This is part of the interaction between healer damage and healer healing. You need to make decisions about these things. It's better to have a living samurai doing constant damage than to squeeze in an extra 2 GCDs of healer DPS. Healer damage matters, a lot, but you are there as the party's resource coordinator. You choose most of what gets spent and how. You keep things going. This is what a healer is in Final Fantasy XIV. You're a support damage dealer who also gets to choose whether a party lives or dies. Thinking of it as just a green DPS is a surefire path to boredom, but it is unmistakably a DPS role. I want to cover one last thing before closing this out. If you are someone who is eager or at least curious to try healing, do not get discouraged if your level 35 dungeon run goes terribly. Now that I'm a healer main, I kind of think healing is the easiest role in the game, but I also think it has a very strange difficulty curve. You are not set up for success at low levels. You will have to do uncomfortable amounts of GCD healing. Most healing jobs do not have the tools they are balanced around until much, much later. Up through a good portion of Heavensward, all healer jobs are missing critical components. When you're an experienced healer that is level and item level synced down, you can make do. If you are new to the role, undergeared and underinformed, you will probably struggle. Just pick any job and give it a few wipes. You won't learn anything by doing nothing. I enjoy the role simply because it's satisfying. You aren't stringing together crazy mechanical combos, but the party both literally and figuratively cannot queue without you. You have access to one of the greatest griefing tools in the game, and on top of that, people commend you simply because you're you. It's easy being green. At the end of the day, healing is about fitting similar blocks together and saving virtual lives. Also taking a lot of lives. Honestly, probably more than we're saving. Thank you all for watching. If you have any ideas or opinions about healer design or job elements, let me know. If you think I'm a big idiot, also let me know. Appreciate any likes or comments or subs, and I'll catch you next time.